Hey, Sam, it's Lauren calling from upstate New York. How are you?
Lauren from upstate New York, how are you?
I'm just marvelous. So I am also calling in with an abortion story today. So I've lived in New York my whole life. I don't have to contend with being in a red state. And when I was 17 and recently graduated from high school, I had an abortion. And this wasn't always an easy story for me to share. I've always been okay with my decision, but the first time that I shared this story with somebody, it was someone who wasn't there for me at the time, and he responded quite violently. So I just, want you to know over the last 18 years that I've come to the point where I can discuss this frankly and openly. And, on the last day of school, when the decision came down, I'm sitting there in a room full of other teachers. The kids already left. They were done. Their summer started, and we were waiting for the time that we could leave the building. The decision comes down, and all of a sudden we're all sharing our stories. And I realized that most of us, at least 60% of the people in that room, had had at least one abortion in their lives. So I feel that, the story I'm about to share, I'm doing this because I want to let people know that they happen pretty often. And y'all probably know at least one person in your lives who has had at least one abortion, and that all of our stories are different, and the narratives aren't always based in, some sort of traumatic experience. Sometimes it's as simple as mine. I was pregnant and I didn't want to be. So, I was 17. It was the summer after I graduated from high school, and realized that I was late. And my best friend went and got me a test, and it was positive. And before I knew it, the room just kind of closed in around me, and I was on the floor, and she was there telling me I'd get through it. She called my mom. My mom is a good person to have on your side in that situation. There was never any doubt. Like, it was a no-brainer. It wasn't some agonizing decision. It wasn't something that I tortured myself over. I was 17. I wasn't ready to be a mother. I'm still not a mother, and I'm okay with that. So, I didn't have to jump through any hoops. Mom was there for me, got it done. Didn't encounter any protesters, thankfully. Mine was surgical, so I came out from the anesthesia, and the nurses were there, and they asked me if I was okay, and I said, I'm okay. Does this mean I'm not pregnant anymore? And when she said yes, I was overcome with relief and with gratitude, and the tears I cried were of, the gratitude for every single person in that room. And for my mother, who was there for me, who brought me there, who, drove me home when I was coming out of the anesthesia. And, I've never, ever felt regret. I have only felt relief. I've only felt gratitude for being able to make that decision, for having that control over my body and my life. And, never once regretted it, never once looked back and thought, what if I'd kept it? Like, that wasn't even a question for me. And, it was that simple for me. And I'm not, my story is my own story. I don't claim to speak for anyone else, but for me, it was as simple as I'm 17, I'm pregnant, I don't want to be. Now I'm 35. I have multiple degrees in education. I am dedicating the next 30 years of my life to teaching children with disabilities. I wouldn't be doing this. I wouldn't be where I am or who I am or doing what I'm doing today if that choice wasn't afforded to me when I was still a child. And, I just want people to know that it's more common than you think, and we don't talk about it as much. And, whether or not we share our stories is up to us as individuals, but there is no shame to be had. The stigma comes from other people. And, a lot of us, made those choices, freed ourselves up to pursue bigger things. And, even now, with Thomas mentioning Griswold and them setting their next target on birth control, I'm in the position where my gynecologist has no issue with, surgical sterilization with someone my age who doesn't have children. So that's going to be my next step. And, I'm one of the lucky ones. I realize that, but it's more common than you think.
Absolutely.
And people should be supported in their choices.
I'm struck by two things. One, as you talk about getting the degrees and what you plan to do with your life, and how if you did not have that right to an abortion, you would have had no control over making that decision for your life. Every subsequent decision after that would have been taken out of your control. And the idea that we can be thrown, that the right in this country talks about freedom and liberty over and over and over again, and want to impose it on things like you can't constrain what the minimum wage is, or it's an infringement on liberty. You can't dictate that people would get health care because that's an infringement upon liberty. You can't force a doctor to provide health care for people under a Medicare system, or all of those things. And yet, the liberty to make fundamental decisions about your life, they just have spent a 50-year project to deny nearly half of the population of this country, ultimately, and then maybe we'll see in a year and a half, maybe they'll pass a federal ban if they're in a position to do so. Or I should say a quarter of this country at this point, the right to make that decision. And then I'm also struck by the fact that, you couldn't even vote. You couldn't even vote when they would have you be forced to be a parent. You couldn't even vote.
Absolutely.
And they would still,
if I had been forced.
The idea that you don't have the capacity to make a choice as to who's going to lead the country, or be your county supervisor, or, sit on the school board. You didn't have the right to do that. You didn't have the competence, right? That's what we're saying. That a 17-year-old doesn't have the competence to make that decision as to who's going to be the county supervisor, or not even make the decision who's going to be it, to express who they want to be it, to have one 17,000th, depending on where you live.
And they're not even close to being able to drink.
Or 250 millionth of an ability to decide who's going to be the president. You can't even have that type of influence because you're not competent to have that. But we're going to make you be a mother. That's what they're saying.
Yeah.
To a 17-year-old, to a 16-year-old, a 15-year-old, a 10-year-old in Ohio, you don't have the right to be, you don't have the competence to decide who's going to be president, to have 240 millionth of an ability to decide who could be president. But you have the right to, you are forced to be a mother. It's just.
Yeah, it's not even a right. It's an obligation at that point. Well, you did it. So now you're stuck. And if I had been stuck, I was living in a hotel at the time. It was one of the couple of times in my childhood that I didn't have a fixed address. And, here I am now, public school teacher with a salary I can live on. If I'd had a child at that time, we're talking generational poverty. I would have been another person caught in that cycle, had my high school diploma, but not much more. I would have been, working in kitchens, working for minimum wage for God knows how long, instead of getting to where I am today, which is another story for another time. And were it not for all of the supports, being there for me, and the public funding, for low-income students being there for me, I wouldn't even be here right now. But you talk about freedom. I would have been trapped in more ways than one.
Lauren, really appreciate the phone call. With your permission, we'll clip this as well.
Certainly.
Thanks, Lauren.
All right, thanks, Lauren.
Yeah, love you guys. Bye.
Bye. Really important to share these stories, folks, because this is the reality that millions of girls, women, people with uteruses will face. Like right now, as we speak, there are millions who are subject to a situation like this. Within months, there's going to be millions upon millions more, because there'll be 13 more states, more or less, that will ban abortion. And then it's quite possible, I challenge anybody to make a rational argument that it's not, that by this time in 2025, there'll be a federal ban on abortion.
And then they're going to target Plan B. I mean, Lauren in these calls, it's so inspiring. I haven't had an abortion, but I've taken Plan B before. And the idea that those have been like those, that could have changed my life when I was, 17 or whatever. And like the response to what some, Lauren has said, right wingers will say, well, you don't have to be a mother. You just have to birth the baby and give it up for adoption. Like, then they're fine with you going through that psychological, difficult situation to give your child to where? To the foster care system that's already completely overloaded, that's underfunded because of austerity politics by Republicans and others. It's just absurd. We have to prepare for that day, the federal abortion ban, potentially. Especially given where the Democratic Party is at right now.
I mean, it would be absurd to rule out the idea that there's going to be a federal ban on abortion. And I think it would even be absurd to say that there isn't at least a 40-50% chance. I mean, if the Republicans take control of all three branches of government come 2025, I challenge anybody to make a coherent argument that Mitch McConnell will be able to tell his caucus, even if it's 50-50 in the Senate at that time, will be able to tell his who are the people that would hold out? Susan Collins and
we just saw John Cornyn. Saw John Cornyn saying they want to kill babies right before the second that they're born, and he's supposed to be on this bipartisan gun control panel where he is more moderate. Liz Cheney, the current liberal bastion of anti-Trumpism, years ago was saying they're trying to kill babies after they're being born. They're not going to have the votes to block this if that's the case.
And what's interesting there too is like those purported moderates or purported kind of like consensus agents, like that type of like right after the baby is born, that Ralph Northam quote kind of thing about what he said about late term abortions. It's indistinguishable from Mark Levin. Like it's indistinguishable.
Yeah,
of course.
It's the same thing. There's no difference.